Welcome back. I hope you have had a brilliant day, and I aim with this video to make it better. We've got the Game Week 2 preview for you, and everything you need is covered. A lot of you have been supporting the channel, and for that, I'm very appreciative. But a lot of you who have been supporting aren't subscribed. So if you could do so, if you could subscribe, I would be greatly appreciative. If you could like the video if you enjoy, that would be great. And let's get into it. The first thing I would like to discuss is someone who I wax lyrical about pre-season, because I think that if you don't own him, somewhat soon, he could start to become a real problem. Now, there's been a lot of talk about wildcard 6, and one of the main reasons for that is Arsenal have 3 brilliant fixtures back to back in 6, 7, and 8. And for that, you would very much looking at having Kai Havertz in your team, right? Alongside just a triple Arsenal in general. However, by that point, I think it may potentially not be too late, but you would have missed out on a lot of value, not just in terms of money, but also points. One of the reasons I picked him at the start was not just because of his fundamentals, and we'll come on to that afterwards, but rather I did not think the fixtures were anywhere near as bad as they were made out to be. Now, yeah, City away will never be great for anyone. However, still for him, I don't think it's too bad. We will come back to that, however. I would like to speak about Aston Villa away, Brighton at home, and Spurs away. We're going to start with Brighton, actually, because it's a home game and what you consider the lesser side out of the 3. And that is, again, just objective and general consensus, as opposed to my own opinion. So I do actually think Brighton might just be harder than both of them, from at least for Kai Havertz. Now, Tony Bloom has brought someone in who will certainly continue the philosophy of De Zerbi. Not to the same extent, but at least the philosophy will remain. De Zerbi's baiting box is what I'm going to call it, where he had a 2-2 build-up, and you would press, you get baited in, and you would try and cut straight through the middle of you, thus turning you over, having a lot of isolated situations for his players, and generating chances from there. Now, the Brighton manager has a different method of building up. It's more of a 3-1 where the 6 or the person who's dropping in just loiters horizontally and is able to receive and comfortable receiving in pressurized situations. However, it's still, again, of a similar philosophy. It's still quite front foot. It's positive. It's attacking. And thus, I think that against Brighton, if you are to get it right, especially on transition or counter-pressing high up the pitch, you can score goals. So that's one thing I like for Havertz. I also think that they defend relatively high compared to teams that are going to probably finish around their position. And I think with Havertz's athleticism, that's certainly something he can exploit. He can definitely do that against Aston Villa and Spurs as well. So sure, Brighton can go and give a very good account for themselves at the Emirates, but I think they're far more likely to score than they are to keep a clean sheet. And thus, having Kai Havertz in that game, I quite like. Right. Before we move on to Spurs and Villa, I'm going to explain why I'm so comfortable holding him, regardless of what the fixtures appear to look like. Goal threat. He has so many avenues to points. He's a monster in the air and also a brilliant set-piece taking team. So he always has that from free kicks and corners. But as we saw against Wolves, attackers in, swinging crosses from the left. He can attack them well and, given dominant, can score. He has a wide variety of finishes, I would say, and that's probably not something that's touched upon. You look at Kane, right? Kane can finish from a lot of angles. One of the reasons I also picked Emil Smith-Rowe. He can finish from a lot of angles, and he has done so in the past at Arsenal. Kai Havertz is similar. If you go and look at his goal catalogue, they're not all the same. He can score from, again, a wide variety of chances. And I think that's very useful, especially in modern-day football, where the level is just being raised week on week on week, year on year on year, where you need to be able to have a large arsenal of weapons. Then let's going back to more FPL perspectives. Expected minutes, sound. It should be pretty much a 90 every game. Even if he is to play a left centre mid, I think with the shift in that left-hand side dynamic to an extent, you definitely still get him at a decent level of output if he is to play that. But given he started at 9 against Wolves, where I actually expected Jesus to start, I'm quite confident that he'll play a lot of minutes at 9 this season. And what he offers you off the ball is one of the main reasons I don't think he's pretty much ever getting dropped. Then the other thing is Arsenal generate so many chances compared to some of the other teams in the league, and that will be constant throughout the season, and they're probably only going to get better, I would say. I would say there was a bit of rust, and I actually wasn't too impressed by the performance against Wolves. They'll only get better at that. He has a brilliant floor and ceiling, similar to Haaland, obviously not to the same extent, but he's got the capacity to score a lot within a game in terms of goals and assists. But as the number 9 in such a good side and having so many avenues to points, he'll always be in the mix for at least one return. I don't think Arsenal lose many games this season at all, but that's fantastic. You have the fundamentals nailed down. And the last thing is his price. He's so accessible at 8 million, where a lot of the premium mids are, 9.5, 10 and above. I think he could definitely match him, especially with the shifts in the bonus structure. And I've given credit to Baker, FPL343 there. You should definitely check out the thread he did on Twitter. And he, of course, has a YouTube channel with Adam. You should definitely check out. But bonus changes are definitely favoring the forwards. And I think this guy could become an absolute phenomenon as a result. Finally, going back to the FDR facade, Villa offer you transitions plenty. Spurs offer you even more. He's got the athleticism to capitalize on that. He's got the quality to capitalize on that. So what's really so bad about it? Like, yeah, sure, Arsenal may concede, and they have a higher chance of conceding in that game. But I'd much rather have Kai Havertz in this type of fixture where I know I'm pretty much guaranteed chances. And the fact that Arsenal's front line is monstrous on transition with Saka, Martinelli, and Havertz. So I really don't see any problems for him. Obviously, you got City away in Game Week 5. I still think he can return, but yeah, not the best fixture. But given the fact that if he does score points in these, his value is going to increase so quickly because he'll establish himself as a second best forward very, very, very quickly. You'll be behind points and value. And I'm just not sure with this guy, with how good of an asset he can be. I'm not sure you want to go there. Talking about the practical application, because it's all good me telling you, oh, buy Havertz. What if you had 3 forwards already, right? That are very good. You can't just go and get a fourth. Solanke, I was close-ish to getting, but I just went back to the fundamentals with Kai. I think Solanke will do well. He'll have a lot of chances generated for him. It's the 9 in 9 system after all, right? They have good quality in that side. Why wouldn't he? I just think over the long run, this is a set and forget. And that's why I said I have a plan of never selling him throughout the season. I have the same plan for my whole Arsenal triple up and Haaland as well. That's probably slightly less concrete given how expensive he is. Never know what structures and opportunities open up. But these 3, and him especially, I have no interest in selling. So if you can find the 0.5 for Solanke, I would at least consider it. Obviously, it's an early move, and you'd be making a real statement and push towards going to Havertz and being bullish on him. But I just do think that you could get a little left behind, and you might struggle to get him late in the season, even early on in the season, should you not go there too early, just given the floor. The other ways you can get him is, of course, you can move money out of Salah if you think you've capitalized on his best fixture in Game Week 1. I spoke about how I'm not too bullish on having him within my team. I still don't think... I think the compromises he makes in the structure with Haaland, who I see as borderline essential, just too much for me, the sacrifices. But, you know, it's just something for you to consider. And then could you maybe take a money out of a Gabriel, or a Trent, a Guardiola to facilitate this? Those are all routes that I think you could take, and I just wanted to at least show you some possibilities. From the second best forward to the first. I said in preseason I expect Cities to be better. I expected their attacking dynamics to improve and for the system to be more optimized for Haaland. I think the first game really showed that that will likely be the case. We've got wingers with more attacking responsibility, have more wide threat, and as it says on the slide, where you can read it, those are the reasons, very simply, for why against low blocks especially, what Ipswich will probably go to the Etihad with, I think that Haaland will accumulate far more chances. The ball's just going to find its way to him in that middle of the box. Chance after chance after chance. Even against Chelsea, he could have had so many more chances if the final pass was better. But the thing you have to understand is, against Chelsea, a lot of the chances were on transition. They were quick sequences. And those are always a little bit more difficult because you have less time. The body's moving quicker. You've got less balance. But against a low block, where if you get in a position, you'll be better stationed. You'll have more balance. And I think that's the key thing. You'll have more balance because you have a little bit more time and the picture will have been painted a little bit earlier as opposed to the players reacting so much. I think the quality into him will be so good that he can score a lot of goals. You've obviously got Gundogan now. Their main issue is probably left centre mid. They fixed that now with him, and what better player to fix it with, right? He wasn't even someone on the cards until a week ago, but yeah, I think City are going to do so phenomenally well. I could go on about them for ages, but I've done a lot of that already in preseason. You can see it for yourself. There's enough here, and I've already said enough about it. I just think if you don't have him this week, you could get in massive trouble. Even next week away at West Ham, I like that for his attacking output. And then from there, if he catches fire, who knows where he's going to stop, right? I think you're going to make the game really, really difficult for yourself. I'm still adamant that Saka can cover Salah. I think he's going to outscore him as well this season. I don't, however, think there's any forward. Maybe Havertz, but probably not. Actually, no. Not with the captaincy of no. I don't think anyone can cover this man. And that's why I'm a little bit fearful for those who don't have him, to go without. I mean, even coming back to the fundamentals within FPL, right? He is fixture proof, right? Apart from Arsenal, I would say he's fixture proof. I still think he's going to get Liverpool once. I think with the amount they offer other teams, I'm expecting him to at least one day really get Liverpool with at least a brace. He seems fitter and healthier this year. I think that'll be better for his minutes and just general gameplay every week. The highest floor and highest ceiling, going back to the fundamentals. Like I said, it's so difficult to compete with that because there's no one else who can access his type of position with his quality. Which brings me to the point of, if you've started so well with a no Haaland team, you're up a lot of points. 4 points isn't that much. Let's just say you're on like 82. Go down to 78 with a -4. That's still a blistering start. Would you ever consider selling maybe an Isak, who I'm not as bullish on as probably was preseason, and not just because of the Southampton game, just because I think there's other options and other ways to use the money, and he is quite expensive at 8.5. Is there ever a world where you could sell Salah as part of a -4 this week? And I think it should be given more thought than it is. I really do think that if you've had a good start, you've banked the points, take the win, you're in the green, and then just go back to Haaland and play it a little bit safe, because I honestly think he could score a huge haul against Ipswich. So just some food for thought. I would just suggest that you consider it. Now, you may be surprised to see this topic specifically, but it's more to address a macro level challenge that we're all facing. Yesterday, or the day before, I found myself getting lost a little bit in the hype of the timeline, selling Quansah, being reactive, making this type of move onto De Bruyne. However, I then saw a tweet from Ollie Poole, which reminded me of a conversation I had with Rich Clark, one of the greatest ever, just to be patient, and it really will pay dividends. And when someone has that type of a record, you should, and you almost must, listen, right? I found myself very eager to do Son to De Bruyne maybe a couple of days ago, but I've called on it now. Why did I pick Son in the first place? Well, he has penalties, he has good fixtures. Overall finishing is brilliant, so if he gets into those positions, he's going to do very well. The only thing I really didn't like about him against Leicester was his position, but maybe against Everton that is tweaked. And so, is he that much of a worse asset than when I picked him a week ago? No. Yes, De Bruyne has a very attractive fixture, but I'll probably have to sell him because they'll have so much competition in the middle. When the season becomes more intense, I will have to use that transfer again. He isn't on penalties. He doesn't have the same goal threat as Haaland, and thus he's not super talismanic from an FPL perspective. For that game, you'll have other threats from the wide areas. Who knows if Foden plays next to him, he'll take a lot of his threat, and De Bruyne will probably be deeper, etc., 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 right? But there was a reason I also didn't pick Kevin De Bruyne from Game Week 1. Now, I didn't expect his minutes to be this good, but still. And thus, I think we can all take something from Rich Clark's teaching, which is that just exhibit a little bit of patience and remember why we pick players. Because I found myself getting into the trap. I imagine at least one of you would have done. Thus, I think this slide is definitely, well, it's worthwhile being in this video to remind you of that. However, if you are thinking of making the move and you don't have any other issues, I don't think it's too bad. I think, obviously, there's a lot of upside because how many does City score against it? No one really knows. Anywhere between 2 and 3, 2008, genuinely, right? Very much dependent on, I think, how that midfield plays and how much influence De Bruyne gets. I think if he has a lot of influence, if you give him a high volume of actions, he'll break you pretty soon. And if he is to play that role, I think he'll do very well. I actually do think he's going to play that role. So if you're willing to potentially take him out maybe 3/4/5, because you will eventually need to remove him, I think, then I think it's fine if you're willing to take that risk and you have no other problems. Otherwise, I'm not as opposed to keeping Son, and this translates to a lot of players in the game. We're going to come on to Nkunku. I wouldn't sell him just yet, and I owe him an apology because I was probably a little bit harsh. Right, now let's look at your more general conundrums, and this is part 1. We will have part 2 on the next slide. Quansah's probably been the biggest issue within the community, and fairly so, right? You spend 4.5 million on a Liverpool asset. If he's integral to your plans, if the structure you've gone for is one whereby he has to play a lot of weeks, then that's not great. And also, is Pedro Porro injured? And if he is, what if I have both? Etc., 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 right? Let's discuss Quansah first. I think it's actually very simple. I think if you have 5 genuinely good defenders, for example, you don't have Barco, like I do, then I think it makes a lot of sense just to take the point. I honestly don't think you need that spot, that 5th defender particularly often. With 4 good defenders, especially given a lot of you will have 2 premiums, I think you're set. Take the 0.1 loss and it's fine. However, if, as in my scenario, he is someone who you need to play regularly and utilize that 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 4.5 spot, then yeah, sell him and go and get a Quansah, go and get someone else. Now that is on the assumption that you have some money in the bank because he has, of course, dropped. If you don't, I would just say, just leave it. Don't downgrade him to a 4.0 like I've seen some others doing if you're in the same spot, because it's not necessary. However, if you are looking at replacements, these are the four that I'd probably consider. Robinson for 2 brilliant fixtures in 2 and 3. And also, given he's at home in 4 and 5, yes, it's West Ham and Newcastle who have 2 good attacks. But given he's at home, given his attacking upside, given they've signed Sander Berge, given they've signed Anderson, I think the clean sheet potential will actually be pretty decent. He gives you upside, and it's the fact that he underlaps as well as overlaps that shows me that Marcus Silva trusts him so much and rates him so highly that he gives him that license to do so. And Iwobi will go really wide to the touchline and happily do so to facilitate these type of runs, because they know this is an avenue where they can hurt teams with his crosses from those areas. I actually quite fancy him getting a haul maybe in one of these 4 games. Ponsa I like because great expected minutes, not super good on the bonus, but the fixtures are so sound from 3 to 6, and you're just getting someone you can play week on week on week on week, and you'll have no real problems. He's not exactly injury prone either, particularly. And you know what? His goal threat from corners is underrated, and I think I really wouldn't be surprised if he nicks one in there. For similar reasons to Robinson, I guess. I think probably a bit less upside, probably worse fixtures, but maybe Robinson 2.0 slightly worse. Colwill, because the fixtures, again, are pretty good. I do think they're slightly masked, as in the next 3 have got FD of 2. Well, 3 of them are away. Secondly, we've seen Maresca's system against lesser sides that are not Manchester City is slightly susceptible to conceding some goals through various patterns and just exploiting space in behind and being a little bit risky. We also don't know how they're going to adjust and play within the Premier League when they play a slightly more normal game. So there's a lot of unknowns there. And with that in mind, for me, I wouldn't go there. I've seen some go there. I prefer the Robinson, Konsa, Hall trio, but Colwill is just something for you to think about. The last pick that people are considering within that defense is Rico Lewis. Now, again, just before I do that, touching on Pedro Porro, just wait to see if he's injured. If he's injured for a few weeks, I'd sell him because the fixtures really aren't that good after Everton. But I think benching him... See, that's the thing. I actually don't like benching him if he's injured, which some people are doing, because I don't think there's that much value in having him after this week. Yeah, sure, he's got the attacking upside, but I honestly don't see Spurs keeping many clean sheets. And at 5-5, I think when you're paying that much, you at least want a chance of clean sheets, but they give the opposition so many chances throughout the game. Going back to Rico Lewis, I don't like him because he's so short-term. Kyle Walker's eventually going to come back into the fight, even if it's for a game here or there. You never know when Pep will iterate and change his system. You never know when he can get dropped. His upside isn't even that big given the role he's playing. Right? It's not like he's got elite ball striking from distance, whereby if they're against the low block and he wants to use this method to break them down, Guardiola, or the players think that that's the best thing in the game, they'll go to Rodri or Foden or De Bruyne from those areas, not Rico. I don't see much upside. I think it's very short term. If you have a fifth defender in Quansah, then I don't think it's worth the transfer anyway. So I just don't like it on any level. Now, applying what I said about Rich Clark's genius to the Nkunku conundrum, I was probably a little harsh. I probably didn't account for the fact that it was his first Premier League game in a long time. I probably didn't account for the fact that it really was Manchester City. It was Maresca's first game, etc., etc. So I was probably a little harsh in the fact that I wasn't so impressed. Similar to Son, I think just let it ride. You have got a top player here with good fixtures. And yeah, I'm a little bit worried about his expected minutes with the fact that Chelsea have so many players and João Felix is coming who could potentially play his position, and the fact that he's coming from injury and he said he just wants to remain fit. However, you have to give him game week 2. I really don't think this is the most of the transfer. If he flops, he probably suffers a price fall early on because I think people would be getting rid of him very, very quickly. But that is something to address then. Similar to Son, I think we take a very similar approach. We rely on the quality. We look at the fixtures and don't try and get too ahead of ourselves. Captaincy, I mean, Haaland's obviously the best option. If you don't have him, yeah, I think you probably have to go Salah. I do fancy Arsenal to score 2 or 3 goals. Thus, I wouldn't mind like a Havertz or Saka to play it safe. I also think you never know what you're going to get from Brentford away nowadays. I mean, they used to be such a solid defensive side. Not so much last season, and Palace created a lot of chances against them. However, do they tighten up a little bit at Anfield? I wouldn't be surprised. They do look a little bit better this year in terms of their pivot and defensively. So I wouldn't mind going Havertz or Saka, given I'm quite bullish on Arsenal, but otherwise I'd keep it fairly routine and go for Mo if you are willing to keep him and not go Haaland. Now, that bit of the captaincy didn't require a lot of talk, right? You got Haaland, there's a clear distinction between Haaland and the rest, and arguably Salah and the rest. However, there's been some talk about the triple captaincy, and I think this deserves a little bit more thought. I don't like it personally. Yes, there are less double game weeks this year. Specifically, there look to be 2, and you look to be having that in 34. I've looked at the fixtures. You don't have to captain Haaland, and I actually like a few of the other combinations of fixtures for some of the premium players that include some of the players we just spoke about, Saka, Salah. There is the potential that we use the free hit in one of the double game weeks and the mystery chip in the other. But there's 2 things. One, we don't know the mystery chip. Okay, so maybe it's useless in a double game. But it's a highly inefficient use. Secondly, we may get more double game weeks. It's happened for many years right now where something unexpected has happened. And I wouldn't be surprised if that happens again. And the other thing is, you don't have to use it on Haaland. And even if you do want to use it on Haaland in a single game week, okay, we could probably do it at Leicester at home. And the difference is probably minimal. Finally, I'm just so set on using it in a double game week because your upside is enormous. It's always enormous. And what if we get a new double game week? But regardless, when you have plays of the quality of Saka and Salah, even to use it on them in a double game week where the fixtures aren't as good, I'm still super comfortable with that and would prefer to do that for the lower risk and higher reward than you get in using it in any single game. So for me, I don't love it. I don't think it's the worst strategy in the world for the reasons mentioned, right? Specifically, the lesser amount of double game weeks this year. But still, it's just not for me. Right, we have 3 things to talk about before the video concludes. The first being Aston Villa from Game Week 3. I was impressed against West Ham for their prospects going forward. Not so much defensively, but going forward, I think by the time we come to Game Week 3, like we spoke with Consa, fixture run's very good. And having Watkins in place could be very nice. And thus, I suggest you at least planning a potential route. Have looked at getting rid of Son and getting rid of Isak to facilitate that. And I would just look at, within your side, could you potentially do that? Do you value him higher than Havertz? Do you value him lower than Havertz? Can you have them both? Etc., etc., right? And I just wanted to put it out there that I think he could do very, very well from Game Week 3 and to at least consider that because I don't think it's been given much thought at all, especially not timeline, and it probably does serve so. There is the question of, can you cover him with a Rodgers? Can you cover him with a Bailey? I didn't love how Rodgers interacted with the side in that particular role. I think he needs a bit more of a passer close to him for him to really flourish, as opposed to him having to do so many carries and still getting the output. So for me, no, I don't like Bailey as an option just because I never trust his expected minutes fully to always get to 90. Slightly injury prone, goal threat, and just finishing level isn't as good as what you would want for a midfield FPL asset. And thus, I think it's basically Watkins or bust. I don't obviously hate the Rodgers move because the fixtures are so good. I'm just not super sure about his output yet, nor his expected minutes. Because what if it was Watkins who stayed on at 60, then who gets hooked? So it's definitely something to consider and play around with, but I would have Villa in your thoughts, and specifically the man on your screen. I'm quite big for practical application on this channel. It's easier for me to say, oh, go and buy Haaland, but if I don't present a route to you, then pretty much useless, right? Should you be a no Haaland and only Salah owner? There is the potential for these two to potentially become exit routes for other players you may wish to have in your side. And there's 2 polar arguments. One, Bruno accumulated so much XGI. He was so involved, as he always is. He's such a good player. The fixtures are pretty good, etc., 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 right? And I understand that side of the argument. The only thing I wanted to present is that I'm still not convinced that United scored that many goals this season. I don't trust their finishing entirely, nor do I trust Ten Hag's system to be one which allows for a lot of chance generation. I spoke about their over-reliance on Kobbie Mainoo in the center of the pitch when Bruno and Mount were playing false 9 on Twitter, and how essentially the creative responsibility he had was humongous and honestly just a little bit unfair and certainly suboptimal because you can't expect him to break down defenses consistently by himself. When you have Bruno and Mount so far away, even with a back towards goal, they don't have the pitch in front of them. It's going to be very difficult for them to create anything, right? Naturally, so look where they are positioned on the pitch. And thus, if Ten Hag's structure continues in that manner, again, I worry about their chance creation. And their finishing has not been that great. And there's no real reason to suggest that it would massively improve unless Rashford does. Rashford gets back to the older type that it did, and yeah, fair enough. But otherwise, I'm still a bit worrisome, and it's why I left Bruno Fernandes out the side. That, yeah, sure, all the fundamentals will be there. but actually putting the ball in the back of the net finally and just generating the chances generally will potentially be a problem. And it's just something to consider because at 8.5, he is an exit route for so many because you can downgrade him and go to many other good options. Eze, Nkunku, if he's good. Smith Rowe, maybe. There's so many. Smith Rowe, again, similar. I think he's obviously not going to facilitate a lot of cash free up, but if he doesn't bang in maybe 2, you could sell him after that if you really don't fancy it for Ipswich away, and you could go to another 5.5. You could go to a Morgan Rogers in game week 3. It's just these type of exit routes to fund and facilitate players like Watkins and Rogers is something I wanted to point out and give you some practical application. Finally, when you're making your moves and essentially reconstructing your side, don't get a structure which is too closed off, which doesn't allow you ever to get to a Havertz or a Watkins or a Solanke and keeps you locked in maybe Haaland and cheap budget striker. Just have some flexibility within the structure because I do think it could really bite you. We've only had 1 week's information. Every single year, something changes. Someone new presents themselves as a brilliant option. And you just want to have the facilities to be able to get to them without too much surgery. It helps that you have multiple free transfers so you can roll now and potentially always get yourself out of an issue. But I wouldn't be making moves that really lock you into one structure and being so close-minded about it because how do we know that big at the back doesn't become a massive thing? And we all end up going 4-4-2 and having Haaland and one cheap striker because we need Trent, Guardiola, Gabriel, and Paro. How do we know on the flip side, we don't need Salah, we don't even need Haaland, and it's actually best to go big at the back and have all the premiums aside from them in the midfield? Unlikely, but everything in between that is a possibility. And I would just say, with you making your moves, just be a little bit careful and have that in the back of your mind. That is all for me today. Again, if you enjoyed, I did, please do consider subscribing. My team's on screen, 64 points, game week 1, and we will see how we do game week 2. I wish you the very best of luck. I shall see you tomorrow for the next video, and have a brilliant, brilliant day. Make it one. Goodbye.